Haven't tried the Locklicious all-natural hair care product line? Well, let's hear what the Lock community has to say about it.
I love how it sprays and how it feels, you guys. Like, it feels so good. And it smells amazing, you guys.
The Lock and Twist moisturizer was really good for me. The hydration mist was phenomenal.
This is the bomb, baby. I was really impressed, kind of blown away, and I think that if you're struggling, definitely go check them out.
And check out the 5-star reviews on our website. So, what are you waiting for? Go to locklicious.com to start treating your crown like royalty.
I wash my natural hair and my face with the same product because natural hair care is easy. Natural skin care is easy. Don't make it hard.
All right, peace to everybody in the building. Peace and shout out to everybody in the building. Peace as well to all of those who will be coming in shortly. Shout out to all the moderators who will be coming in the building and joining us shortly as well. After yesterday's live stream, which I will admit, got a lot of feedback from yesterday's live stream. A lot of people called me back. It's a couple of shows that I'm going to be going on this week to talk about my DNA results. But last week's finding and yesterday's revelation definitely helped me out a lot, even I could say tremendously. And so we're going to continue. In further exploring some of the results of my DNA, I noticed something very interesting. If I could be redundant for just a little bit, as you guys know, I'm an author, right? You can see that, I've authored several books. Again, the name that I author under is Abdiel Ben Levi, all right? Abdiel Ben Levi, which is my Hebrew name. So yesterday or last night, right, after our live stream, after me showing you guys the results of my ancestry and how it showed me that I had an ancient Egyptian royal of priests that was in my mitochondrial DNA on my mother's side, right? After exploring that, after looking at it and seeing it, I said, well, damn, I want to check this thing out further. So I'm doing some studies and I came across something that I had already knew. But obviously, with this new information that I have about my DNA, it spoke even more volume to me. So again, in 1994, I chose the Hebrew name Abdiel Ben Levi, right? Abdiel in Hebrew means servant of God, and Levi is and represents the tribe of Levi or Levi. And so let me show you for a second why this is all relevant. Keep in mind, yesterday's live stream showed that in my DNA, I have Yoruba Jews, I have Ethiopian Jews, Lemba Jews, Igbo Jews, which was, amazing to come across. The Lemba Jews are in South Africa, which was interesting because they were also showing that I had Khoisan, which is in South Africa. The Khoisan people are considered the oldest living group. So this was deep. So again, going through that and then also finding that I had Egyptian DNA, but not just Egyptian DNA, but Egyptian royal DNA, and royal as in the priesthood, that definitely blew my mind. So it made me go into something I had seen a couple of years ago and really wasn't sure how to interpret it. So let me share with you now what I'm talking about. In the ancient Egyptian kingdom, during the reigns of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, you have a vizier in Egypt who is known as Abdiel. Abdiel, which is the Hebrew word and name Abdiel, my name. This is the only Egyptian official, royal, that has a Hebrew name. His title in ancient Egypt is Vizier, or in the Medu Neter, they call that an emir, which is interesting because, again, the moment that you begin to learn about ancient Egypt and you really, really become a deep diver in its culture, in its heritage, you learn so much more than what people are talking about on the surface. So the moment you become a vizier in Egypt, right, second in command, you naturally also become part of the Egyptian priesthood. So that your viziers, those who served as second in command, they were also part of the Egyptian royal priesthood, right? One of the more famous ones that you guys probably already know of is Imhotep, right? Imhotep was commissioned by Nisut or Pharaoh Djoser, right, to build Egypt's first pyramid, right? The step pyramid, the pyramid of Saqqara, right? And he was a vizier as well. He was a high priest as well, part of the Egyptian priesthood. So automatically, the term vizier in Egypt also entails that you belong to the priesthood, but more importantly, even the high priesthood in certain aspects when you go to ancient Egypt. Now, the thing that I found interesting is that when I looked at my DNA over the weekend, the places that my DNA showed me was interesting for more reasons than one, because in one place with the Limba part of my DNA suggests a Levite origin, right? But the Yoruba part of my DNA would suggest an Ephraimite origin, or the children of Joseph, the descendants of Joseph, which is interesting because I've always considered myself in some ways a priest, in some ways a priest in terms of the knowledge and in terms of being deeply spirited. Absolutely. I've over the years, I've always imagined in my mind that I was very much like a priest, hence why I chose the tribe of Levi, right? And so that is also why I chose the name Abdiel, because the priest is supposed to serve the Creator. And my name Abdiel translates in Hebrew, servant of God. So what was interesting about all this is that the Yoruba Jews identify as coming from the tribe of Ephraim, which is Joseph. And the Limba Jews is the priesthood. So here it is in my DNA. I have seemingly Levite origins, and I have seemingly Joseph origins, which is highly interesting in light of everything I'm about to share with you. So check this out. I was never a person that believed in coincidences. I stress that in all of my classes, that there's no such thing as coincidence. Having said that, let's have some fun. If the screen is nice and big, you guys type a 1 for me, please. If the screen is nice and big, type a 1 for me. If not, I'm going to attempt to make it a little bigger. All right, so this is an article from biblicalarchaeology.org about Abdiel, the Egyptian vizier and servant of the god El. And I'm going to highlight what it says here, parallel for Joseph in the Bible. That's even more interesting now, because the only Egyptian royal official, a priest at that, to have a Hebrew name is this guy, Abdiel, which is my Hebrew name. And when you study his life, his career, as it were, he has many parallels to the biblical Joseph, from which you get the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, which is also interesting because remember, my DNA suggests Levite origins as well as Ephraimite origins. So I thought all of this was just altogether too seemingly coincidental for it to be coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. So I want to read the article for you. And the article says, let me attempt to blow it up even more because I want to make sure everybody can follow me. The article says, who is the Egyptian Vizier Abdiel? In 1980, Egyptologist Alan Zevi began excavating a rock-cut tomb in Saqqara, Egypt, near Cairo. He and his team quickly discovered that this was no ordinary complex. Replete with hidden chambers, the tomb had 4 levels. While battling collapsing rock due to water erosion on the cliff above, they carefully uncovered the various rooms. Finally, in 1987, they discovered the tomb's burial chamber with the remains of an Egyptian vizier by name Abdiel, his wife Touret, and his son Hui. Each had been buried in 3 coffins. And here is a picture of his sahu, right? Of his sahu, his coffin or his mummy. Here is a picture of his sahu, okay, his coffin or his mummy. And I'll continue reading. Extraordinary grave goods fill the room. Canopic jars, a diadem, and a wood cubit listing some of Abdiel's prestigious titles, to name a few. These items, along with the tomb's inscriptions and illustrations, help paint a picture of Abdiel's importance in ancient Egypt. In his article, Pharaoh's Man, Abdiel the Vizier with a Semitic name, published in the July/August 2018 issue of Biblical Archaeology Review, Alan Zevi explores this intriguing figure. The Egyptian vizier Abdiel, who lived, listen to this, in the 14th century BCE, and who likely served 2 pharaohs, Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, better known by his later name, Akhenaten. If you know anything about ancient Egyptian Nisuts or pharaohs, you know that Akhenaten is credited in Egypt as being the one who brings monotheism. He's originally known, right? He's originally known by his name, which is an interesting name, albeit by itself, Amenhotep, right? But then Amenhotep IV. But then he changes his spiritual disposition and he renames himself Akhenaten. And now he begins to institute a very aggressive religious reform in ancient Kemet, where they're throwing out all of the gods and they're worshiping one God. And it's this time period in ancient Egypt that's accredited that ancient Egyptians practice monotheism. Even though, if I can admit this to you based on my knowledge, there are certainly scholarly evidences that show that there was monotheism in Egypt earlier than that. Akhenaten is certainly the one who is arguably celebrated for it. All right, so that's interesting. So the Semitic vizier named Abdiel, the 2 pharaohs he serves is Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, also known by his name Akhenaten. Now, just so you guys know, the religious reform of Akhenaten wasn't really about him alone. Certainly, he had to embrace it for it to become a law in Egypt, for it to have grown the way it grew. But I need you to know that this religious reform in Egypt began with the priesthood in Egypt. And what's interesting about this, I had already knew this over the years, that the religious reform of Akhenaten actually began with his priesthood. But what I didn't know was that the chief priest or the high priest over his priesthood at the time was a Semitic, possibly Hebrew, vizier by the name of Abdiel. I say possibly Hebrew because it's the name Abdiel, the name you find in the Bible. 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 15. He was a Gadite, a chief Gadite. All right, let me continue reading. And so Abdiel's name is unusual. In Egyptian, it is Upper El. Upper is the Egyptian way to render the Semitic word Abed, which means servant. Remember, my name Abdiel means Ebed El or Aved El, servant, Eved, El of God. So Avdi, servant of, the yod at the end being possessive, servant of El, God, Abdiel. That's an unusual name in Egypt, especially for an Egyptian priest. So Elaine Zavid believes that the Vizier's name actually would have been pronounced Abdiel, same way it's pronounced by Hebrews in the Bible. The second part of his name consists of the god El, the head of the Syrio-Canaanite pantheon. Thus, Abdiel means servant of God. El is also the generic term for God and is one of the names of the Israelite deity in the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to add a correction to that and say one of the epithets of the Israelite deity in the Hebrew Bible. Abdiel the Vizier holds many titles, including Chief of the Town, Vizier, General of the Horses, Chief in the entire land, Messenger of the King, i.e. Ambassador, and Father of the God, which represents his title as a senior advisor who knew the Pharaoh as a child. Abdiel is the only vizier in the history of ancient Egypt to be called Child of the Cap, which represents someone who was raised or educated in the palace of Egypt. This is groundbreaking for me that I'm sharing with you guys because my name is a very uncommon name in the Israelite community. You can find a million Judahs, Yahawada. Everybody in the Israelite community is Yahawada, Yahawada, Yahawada. What's your name, brother? Yahawada, Thawada. All kind of Yahawadas, right? What's your name? Yehuda, Judah. Very common. Joseph, Yosef. If you're one West, Yawasap, right? Those are very common names. You don't find Israelites with my name, Abdiel, which is part of the reason why I named myself Abdiel, because when I looked around at the temple in the year 1994, I found that everybody had common names. And I've always been kind of a unique individual. And by unique, I mean I find my own lane, I get in it, and I develop that. I don't try to build upon what someone else has established. So I'm not a person that I don't follow the grain. You know, I'm not following nobody's lane. I create my own lane. So when I was choosing a name for myself in 1994, part of the reason why I chose Abdiel is because it means servant of God, which my teacher would always tell us is the highest title that a human being could have. And I said, really? What about the term Melech, king? What about Kohen, priest? The king is the highest person in the land, the highest official, right? The priest is the highest spiritual official. What do you mean, servant of God? Until my teacher explained it to me. He said, go back in the Torah and see how many times Moses is addressed as servant of God. And I said, oh, damn, you ain't lying, all over the place. Went to Malachi. It says, remember the laws, or in Hebrew, Zakor Torat Moshe Avdi. Remember the laws of Moses, my servant. Avdi, my servant. Because Moshe, or Moses, was Avdiel, the servant of God. So I said, yeah, I'm sold now. I'm definitely going to choose this name. And when I looked around, nobody had that name. So I was sold. This is my name. And then years later, I'm now a couple of months shy of turning 43 years old, 28 years in the Israelite community, 2 years short of being 30 years or 3 decades in, learning a lot, having a lot of experiences, ups and downs, life, right? And then recently to find that my DNA confirms my beliefs, confirms that I am a bloodline descendant of the biblical Israelites. And then to learn now that in my matrilineal DNA, on my mitochondrial side, my mother, I have an ancient, distant Egyptian ancestor who was a priest. That's interesting. So when I add all of those equations, as well as my name Abdiel, and then learning about this Egyptian Vizier, it just is telling me in some way, shape, or form that my life is not coincidental, the things that have been happening to me in life. We all have signs and symbols that tell us who we are and what we're to do. And as life is playing out before my eyes, literally, as life is playing out before my eyes, I'm clearly starting to see what I am really supposed to be doing. So, a lot of this information for me is confirmation, and I share it here with you guys because you all have a story to tell. Each and every single one of us have something about us that's unique that no one else can say. But you have to open the Torah. You have to open the historical record. You have to open your soul and find out what that is. And then you will know who you are to be. So let me continue. Abdiel, the Semitic vizier in Egypt, is the only vizier in the history of ancient Egypt to be called child of the cap, someone raised or educated in the palace. He also bears the title first servant of Aten, which is interesting because even his title in Medu Neter would entail servant of God, right? His name in Hebrew, Abdiel, means servant of God. And they say here one of his titles is servant of Aten. Aten was considered a Neter, a god in ancient Kemet. So this is interesting. Although this title's ending is not readable, the surviving part shows that Abdiel was connected to the Egyptian god Aten, whose worship rose to prominence during Akhenaten's reign. So what is most interesting right now about these facts for me? I already know through studying the history and histories of ancient Egypt that the Aten reform and revolution, spiritual revolution in ancient Kemet, was more so put in place with the priesthood. There were some earlier kings that also did some things as well, but it's a known fact that it was really the priesthood that is responsible for this revolution, for this reform. And to now know that the high priest, the chief priest, the Sept priest, at that time was none other than a priest by the name of Abdiel. I mean, coincidence? Is it coincidence that the high priest of Egypt, who was in part responsible for the monotheistic revolution of Akhenaten, is it coincidence that he has a Hebrew Israelite name? You tell me. Is it coincidence that the person who is arguably celebrated today for bringing monotheism in ancient Egypt, Akhenaten, the high priest that serves him, has a Hebrew name of Abdiel? So who influenced who is the question. Was this reform really Kemetiu based or Egyptian based? Or was this reform the mind of an Israelite impressing upon Akhenaten what he as an Israelite already knows to be true? Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad, the Lord is one. So the question is, who influenced who? Did Akhenaten influence this priest? Akhenaten comes from a system that is not considered historically or academically monotheistic. But he just happens to have a high priest who is clearly a Semite, and we can safely call, to some respect, a Hebrew based on his name at least. It then is arguable that it's very possible that this Semitic Vizier is in fact responsible for the monotheistic revolution that you see in ancient Kemet. I'll read some more. An official, possibly of foreign origin, with a Semitic name, meaning servant of El, who became a vizier in ancient Egypt, may remind many of the figure of Joseph in the Bible. Alan Zivi is quick to clarify that he is not identifying Abdiel with Joseph, nor is he claiming that Joseph was a historical person. In the Bible, Joseph, son of Jacob, also called Israel, and Rachel, is born in Haran, northern Levant. His family settles in the land of Canaan, southern Levant, and he grows up there until his brothers sell him into slavery around age 17. He ends up in the household of an Egyptian officer named Potiphar, who was captain of the guard. Joseph excels in Potiphar's household. Let me drop a link to this article, by the way, in the chat room. And moderators, if you can, shout out to Abdiel. Shout out to, Mordecai Naftali. I see you, King Rock. Scott, I see you, Scott. Shari, I see you. Moderators, if you can, reshare this link that I'm placing in the chat room. This is a link to the article that I'm reading. I'd like everybody to be able to have this so you can see for yourself. Okay. Joseph excels in Potiphar's household until Potiphar's wife frames Joseph for attempted assault. Joseph then lands in prison, where he stays for several years. During that time, he interprets dreams for 2 members of Pharaoh's household. Joseph's interpretations come true, and 2 years later, when Pharaoh has disturbing dreams, Joseph's skill of interpreting dreams is remembered. Joseph is summoned from prison and interprets Pharaoh's dreams, predicting a severe famine. Pharaoh then makes Joseph at age 30 second in command. That's called a vizier, and puts him in charge of storing provisions for the famine. In this role, Joseph is later reconnected with his brothers, who go to Egypt to buy grain, and eventually with his entire family. There are similarities between the biblical figure of Joseph and the vizier Abdiel. Both have Semitic names and likely origins and rise to prominent positions in Egypt. However, all these commonalities are striking. It is not possible to correlate the two based on the existing archaeological evidence. Nevertheless, Abdiel, the vizier, was an important, intriguing figure in the 14th century. You can learn more about his identity and the tomb he was discovered in Alan Zivi's article, Pharaoh's Man, Abdiel, the vizier with a Semitic name, in the July/August 2018 issue of Biblical Archaeology Review. And what I want to say in this moment, in this instance, is, once again, nothing in the world is coincidence. Nothing. If you are a person who is not spiritually driven and spiritually led, then certainly you will hold to the notion that there are coincidences in the world. But for the rest of us who are deeply spiritual, we know that there are no coincidences in the world. So, me finding out last week, confirmation through my DNA of being bloodline connected to the biblical Israelites, that was a powerful thing. And of course, finding out that in my mitochondrial DNA that I have a connection to an Egyptian royal official who was a priest, Khnum Neket, That was definitely something too. And then now knowing that the only Vizier ever in ancient Egyptian history to have a Hebrew name, his name above all names, out of all names, is Abdiel, the same name that I have. Coincidence? And so, once again, I'm sharing with you guys many ways in which I find myself recently becoming inspired to continue to stay in my lane and develop this course, because as time is playing out, history is playing out literally before my eyes. I am here where I'm at, where I'm supposed to be for a reason, and I believe that that reason is divine. And we are all stationed in time where we are supposed to be for a very specific reason. And I also believe that that reason is divine. So I use my testimony that I'm sharing with you guys to inspire you with the notion to know that we are all unique. There is something about us that sets us apart from anybody in the world. There's something about you that makes you so special, so unique, that the Creator decided to create you. I say this so often in our Hebrew classes, our Torah classes. Do not take your life haphazardly, like you're just here. There's nobody here that doesn't have to be here, that shouldn't be here. So if you're here, there's a greater scheme at hand. There's a grand role for you. But you determine how much you're going to play the role with your actions, your everyday actions. So if I can leave you guys with a lasting thought, I want to definitely say to you guys, where you are in life today is where, in fact and in part, you are supposed to be. If that is somewhere negative, it may be a learning lesson, a life lesson, a divine lesson, nonetheless, a lesson. There are signs and symbols constantly around us, and we are charged, we are tasked with interpreting them. Your life should be so special to you that instead of spending hours upon hours upon hours of draining our eyes on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, give that same energy to knowing thyself. Because above all, man, know thyself. With that being said, peace to all of you. I'll be sharing a lot this week. I'll be going over the Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament in depth, but I'm going to have to first complete the Passover history. So I'm going to go through the whole Exodus narrative, showing first and foremost how the Exodus is a historical event, the Hebrews are a historical people, and the Passover was a historical occurrence. So I'm going to be doing that for the next 2 weeks straight. After that, I'll be coming back to talk about all of the original and oldest Hebrew and Aramaic manuscripts of the New Testament. With that being said, guys, enjoy your day, and I will.
Still haven't tried the Locklicious All Natural Hair Care product line? Well, let's hear what the Lock community has to say about it.
I love how it sprays and how it fills, you guys. Like, it feels so good. And it smells amazing, you guys.
The Lock and Twist moisturizer was really good for me. The hydration mist was phenomenal.
This is bomb, baby. I was really impressed, kind of blown away, and I think that if you're struggling, definitely go check them out.
And check out the 5-star reviews on our website. So, what are you waiting for? Go to locklicious.com to start treating your crown like royalty.
If you want to have a better view on how the Bible looks at women in its proper context, then you should get these two books. Matriarchs of the Covenant, written by Abdiel Ben Levi, popularly known as Zion Lex. This is a masterpiece.